now that we've got our feet wet with scales and axes, let's go ahead and build out a line chart. So we're going to put together a lot of the things that we've used so far. You can see here we're starting with the bar chart we did before. So let's get to work. Our data here, we used a simple array, right? We're going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and use D3's CSV module to load an external data file, right? And we're not going to need the rest of that. So let's go ahead. We're going to need an SVG still. And we're going to go a little quicker here. So if you do want to pause, feel free to go ahead and do that, right? And we're going to be a little more pragmatic about our layout, right? We can keep our text, that's fine. So here we had an SVG, right? To start, we might want to define the width and our height of our viz, right? So if we want to define the width, right? Let's say we're going to start with something that's 500 wide. Let's give it some height, right? HEIGHT. All right, let's give it some height. Let's do that. And then we can go ahead and select our SVG, right? And we're going to want to set those, right? So we can set the width and the height to be our own width and height. Width, and set that to be width. And set our height attribute to be height. Right, so now we've got our SVG still, and we might also want to, we're going to want to give this some axes. So we're going to want to give it some margin, right? And we can do that pragmatically by declaring our margin here. So we'll set this to be an object, right, that has top margin, right, top, bottom, right? We'll give ourselves some space on the bottom. Left, we'll give ourselves an axis on the left, right? And then on the right, we don't need any space, right? So we're going to go ahead and declare our margins there, right? And to start, we're going to want an X and a Y, right? So X here, we're going to be using time, right? So this is going to be D3 dot scale time, right? And we'll give it, we know that our range here is going to be, we'll go from margin dot left, right, to the width of the page. Right, so that's where we're going to put things on the page. And similarly, we'll have a Y, right, we'll do this as a linear scale. So this is going to be a linear scale, right, and we're going to map these from the top of our page down to the bottom margin, right? So in fact, we'll think about this in reverse, right? So we'll go from the height of the page minus the bottom margin up to the height of the page. Right, because we're going to want to do that up to 0, right? So we'll invert that to start because SVG X and Y start at the top and the bottom. So we're going to want to load our data, and we're going to use D3's CSV module to do that. So if we go ahead and do d3.csv, we need to pass it a URL. This is a URL to a data file of date and happiness, right? It's created by Hedonimeter. So we'll use this, right? And for the data, for the CSV module, takes one argument, right, which is one argument minimum, which is a function that responds to the callback. So we'll pass it a function of error in data, right? And here we can go ahead and look at the data that we got back, right? So this is going to run, go fetch that data file for us. We've kind of got the scaffold of a graph out here. So if we go look at the data that got passed back, we lost bottom. So we wanted margin dot bottom, right? Height minus margin dot bottom. Do we not have that? Let's check that again. Unexpected end. Yeah, well here. Okay. So let's go see what we got. Bottom. Okay, that was probably from before. I don't think that was a current error. So if we want to go look at the data that we got, all right. Here we got our data passed back, array of 3,117 elements. The header of that CSV, D3 interpreted for us, right? So the header was date value, right? And we got the strings for date value from each row, right? Here it's just 2 strings, right? So what we can actually do is we can pass a sneaky element here, which is the row function. So we're going to pass another function in to this as an argument, right? And this is going to operate on rows. So here we're going to need to return a new object, which is the transform rows. We get the data here, D for each row. And this is just a quick way to pass through. We could go ahead and manipulate our data here, but we can just pass it through a function which is going to do the formatting for us, and this is pretty clean. So what we can do here, You can see, for example, if we return a new date as just an empty string, right now we're going to actually, when we run this, right, we're going to get back a bunch of objects, right, which are actually have a date attribute. That is all going to be an empty string here, right? So what we want to do is transform the date and the value that we had passed in from the CSV into something that's usable. So we'll take the string, we'll give it the plus here, right, which is actually going to convert it to a float. And for the date, we're going to want to take that old date and we're going to format it into a JavaScript date. So D3 has a helper module for this, D3 time format. So you can take a look at that for the format strings that will help us. We'll just go ahead and say, we'll declare a variable and we'll say this is our date format, right? We're going to get a function here, which is D3.timeFormat, right? And we're actually going to want a parser, D3 time parse. And all we need to pass that is the format string. So here we'll pass it our format string. We know that our things were in year, right? %year. And then we had month and day. Right, so we had our date format, and we're going to go ahead and pass all of our dates through that date format. So now we can go ahead and clean this up, right? And we can go ahead and look at our new objects, right? So let's see what we got back. So we should have a cleaner data file here where we have the date and the value accessible, and that's what we got. Right, here we declared our scale linear and our scale time. Now what we're going to want to do, we have the data, right here. We don't need to keep logging it. We're going to go ahead and use that to create a line. So we have the X and the Y set. We're also going to need our line generator, right? So we can go back and create that. So line is going to be our D3.line, right? And that needs an X and a Y attribute. Right, so it needs, we can set functions in here, right, where our function for X, right, is we're going to want to actually go ahead and use our X scale, right, and pass it the date, right. So our X scale is going to be a time scale, right, and we're going to use that to format the date. And similarly, we'll do that for Y, except we're going to use the Y scale, which is our linear scale, and we'll pass in the value. Right, so here we go. Now we can go ahead and use our SVG element. So we'll take our SVG, right, and we're gonna append, we'll make a subselection, right? So let's select all the paths that we have on here. We're gonna, thing to note again here, this is gonna be an empty selection because we don't have any paths. And what we can do, D3.selectPath, we're gonna apply a single data element, right, which is gonna be our data. So we'll apply it as a single element, right? And then we'll go ahead and create the new element we didn't have. Append, we're going to want a path here. So append a new path element, which is going to be our one element, right? And then we can set the D attribute for that, right? So the D is going to be the path spec attribute, like we saw before, right? And in there, we're going to want to pass our line generator through D. We've done everything correctly, right? Now we're going to go ahead and have a new path created on our SVG. So let's go take a look. So looks like we created our path, datum, data, enter, append, right? And should have created a new element, right? D3.line. I wasn't happy with our D3.line. So we can go back and check this out, right? So if we go back to the D3 wiki, we must have used the line generator wrong. So if we go take our line, D3.line, X and Y, and this should be what we did. So, if you do debug, I think it's kind of good to see how to run through here. So we created a D3.line, gave it an X and a Y. And what did we not do? D3.line, gave it an X and a Y, right? Which are both functions. So there must be an earlier error, right? So let's go ahead and say that we've created our path. It's a little trickier in CodePen because it dumps out all the errors, so we won't know exactly where we are. Okay. Right, so here we use datum, right? So we use this a little incorrectly, right? So datum, actually, we needed an element, right? So datum will apply data to a single element. So here, right, we can go actually and add a path, set the data, right, on that path, and then we can use that data to create a line. So now if we go ahead and look at our line generator here, we created a path, right, and let's go ahead and look at our SVG, right, and in here we have our path element, right. We can't see it yet because we haven't applied any color or fill to it, right. We've gone ahead and created this path, right. Now we can go ahead if we want to and give it a little more style. So that we can actually see what's going on here, right? So path, let's give it a stroke, which we'll just give it a, let's give it a steel blue, give it a nice stroke here, right? We don't need to give it any fill, right? And we'll give it some width. So let's give it some stroke width, right? And we should be seeing it shown up here. And we can also give it a, we want to make a dash line here, right? So if we do stroke dash array, right, we can set something like this. We'll do 5 pixels, right? We forgot to set the domain and range on our X and Y, right? So we're going to actually want to go and set those, right? So we have the data loaded, right? So we're going to want to say that our D3, our X, right? So our X dot, we already set the range. So X dot domain is going to be D dot, well, here we're going to want the extent, right? So why don't we go D3 dot extent? Let's map it for the full extent of our data, right? So we're going to want to use X, we're going to want to use the time, right? And Y, we're going to want to use the values, right? So D3 dot extent of data. And here we'll go ahead and actually just extract here we'll extract the dates, right? So here we'll return d.date, right? And similarly, we'll go ahead and map a function here to give us just those. And here we just want the values. So we went ahead and just move those path specifiers. So we actually need to set those as attributes. So we can go ahead and set them there. And we have our dashed line chart. So now the next thing that we can do is go ahead and add points. So we can have a dashed point line.